Carlos Hathcock came from the poverty-stricken woods of Arkansas, but became the most feared sniper in the Vietnam War. His legacy was built on silence, obsession, and brutal precision. As he crawled through the mud and jungle to hunt high-value targets, one bullet at a time. By the end, the Viet Cong placed a $30,000 bounty on his head, and still couldn't stop him. This is the story of how a quiet Marine became a ghost that changed modern warfare forever. Carlos Norman Hathcock II was born on May 20th, 1942 in Little Rock, Arkansas, during the middle of World War II. His parents divorced when he was still young, and he was raised mostly by his grandmother and his mother. Life wasn't easy. His family struggled financially, and the weight of poverty was something he felt every day. He didn't grow up with luxuries or distractions. What he had was the land around him, the woods, the fields, the stillness. That's where Carlos spent most of his time. While other kids played games, he was learning how to track, move quietly, and shoot. He got his first .22 caliber rifle when he was barely old enough to carry it. He used it not just for practice, but to bring home food. Rabbits, squirrels, birds, anything that could be cooked and put on the table. He wasn't raised to be violent. He was raised to survive. Every shot he took as a boy had a purpose. Missed shots meant no dinner. From a young age, he learned how to breathe steadily, to stay completely still, and to fire only when absolutely sure. Carlos also developed a deep sense of independence. He rarely spoke unless he had to. He was comfortable in silence. In fact, he preferred it. That silence taught him how to listen, not just to people, but to nature, to the wind, to footsteps, to the way branches moved. These weren't just survival skills. These were sniper instincts, long before he ever wore a uniform. He often imagined himself as a Marine, even as a little boy. He used to walk around with his grandfather's old Mauser rifle, pretending he was in battle. The Marines were the standard of toughness and discipline to him. So when he turned 17 in 1959, he didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps without a second thought. He knew what he wanted, and nothing else mattered. It wasn't for glory or medals. It was because he felt called to do something bigger than himself. At the time, no one took much notice of him. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest, but there was something different about him, a calm focus, a way of looking at things as if he were already sizing up distance, light, and risk. He was about to become one of the deadliest snipers in American history. People just didn't realize it yet, but that's exactly what was coming. After completing basic training, Carlos was assigned to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. It was here, among rows of disciplined Marines and miles of training grounds, that his natural skills began to stand out. While others followed orders and learned slowly, Carlos had an instinctive control of his weapon. In 1962, he began entering formal shooting competitions within the Marine Corps. These weren't casual matches. They were intense, high-level contests, where only the best marksmen competed. Carlos didn't just hold his own, he dominated. In 1963, he won his first major title at the Marine Corps Rifle Championship. The victory got people's attention. Officers started to notice there was something exceptional about this young Marine from Arkansas. But Carlos didn't let the praise distract him. He kept training, improving, pushing his limits. He studied wind, bullet drop, breathing, and even the smallest factors that could affect a shot. His discipline paid off. In 1965, he won the Wimbledon Cup at Camp Perry, Ohio, a civilian long-range shooting competition dating back to the 1800s. It was a rare achievement for an active-duty Marine and proof that his abilities weren't just military standard. They were elite on a national level. Competitors fired at targets over 1,000 yards away, and Carlos was nearly flawless. By now, his name was known across the Marine shooting community. But while he was stacking up trophies, the world was changing. The conflict in Vietnam was growing fast. U.S. troop numbers were increasing every month. In early 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered a major escalation of American forces in Southeast Asia. Thousands of young men were being sent into brutal, unfamiliar war. Carlos saw the writing on the wall. He knew his shooting skill wasn't for sport anymore. He was a Marine first, and he understood what was coming. He volunteered for a combat role, not just as rifleman, but as sniper. When his deployment orders came, he didn't hesitate. He packed his gear and prepared for a new kind of battlefield. In 1966, he finally arrived in South Vietnam during one of the deadliest phases of the war. He was assigned to the 1st Marine Division, operating out of Hill 55, just south of Da Nang, a key U.S. military base and a hotspot for enemy activity. The area was a constant war zone. Every hill, every rice paddy, and every stretch of jungle could be hiding in ambush. The conditions were brutal. The air was thick with humidity, and the heat beat down constantly. Leeches, mosquitoes, and thick vegetation made even the simplest movements exhausting. Visibility was low, and the enemy was skilled in guerrilla tactics. For most soldiers, it was like fighting a shadow. When Carlos arrived, snipers weren't seen as essential to the mission. They were used occasionally, but not as a core part of the strategy. The U.S. military still leaned heavily on airstrikes, artillery, and large infantry movements. But that mindset began to change quickly, especially in places like Da Nang, where the enemy used hit-and-run tactics, tunnels, and booby traps to stay one step ahead. Commanders started to realize that to fight a hidden enemy, they needed someone just as invisible. That's where Carlos came in. He brought with him a rifle that wasn't standard military issue, a Winchester Model 70, chambered in .30-06 Springfield. It was the same type of rifle he'd used in competition back in the States. To him, it wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of himself. He trusted its accuracy more than any issued gear, and he maintained it religiously, cleaning it after every mission without fail. Carlos gave the rifle a name, White Feather. He also wore a single white feather tucked into his boonie hat. He did it not to boast, but as a quiet challenge. He knew enemy snipers were watching. He wanted them to know he was there, and he wasn't afraid. The feather soon became infamous among the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. It marked him as a ghost in the jungle. Soldiers began whispering stories about a sniper who never missed, who moved silently through thick brush, and who could kill from over 1,000 yards away. Soon, enemy commanders placed a bounty on the man with the white feather. But from the moment Carlos stepped into Vietnam, he wasn't thinking about becoming a legend. He had a job, and that job was to protect Marines. Every shot he took was calculated and precise. He didn't shoot unless it was necessary, but when he did, the enemy never got back up. With every confirmed kill, his reputation grew. Word spread among both allies and enemies. Carlos wasn't chasing recognition. He was doing what he was trained to do. But the true storm was just starting. In one of his most famous missions in late 1966, U.S. intelligence had located a high-ranking North Vietnamese Army general operating in enemy-controlled territory. The general was responsible for directing ambushes that had killed dozens of Marines, and Carlos was selected to take him out alone. He began his crawl from over 1,500 yards away, across open terrain with no cover. The area was heavily guarded. Enemy patrols passed frequently. He moved only inches at a time, blending into the grass and mud. During the day, he baked under the sun. At night, temperatures dropped, and dew soaked his gear. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He stayed completely still, even as ants and insects crawled into his clothing and bit his skin. After nearly 3 full days of crawling, he finally reached a position just outside the enemy base. Through his scope, he saw the general walk out of a small building followed by bodyguards. Carlos didn't flinch. He waited until the general was alone in his line of sight and fired once. The general fell instantly. Chaos broke out in the camp, and no one ever found the shooter. Carlos then crawled back the same way he came, undetected, once again. That mission shocked the North Vietnamese. They realized they weren't just fighting troops on the ground. They were being hunted by someone who could get in and out without leaving a trace. Soon, enemy intelligence identified him as the White Feather Sniper. And in response, the North Vietnamese army put a bounty of $30,000 on his head. At the time, it was one of the highest known bounties placed on an American in Vietnam. For comparison, bounties on most US snipers rarely reached even a few thousand. The price tag was more than just money. Carlos was no longer just operating behind enemy lines. Now, he was the target. Word spread that specialized enemy snipers were being deployed just to eliminate him. These weren't ordinary shooters. They were trained, experienced, and deadly. And the most feared among them was known only by a code name, the Cobra. Cobra was a Vietnamese sniper with a long kill list. He was rumored to be just as patient and just as methodical as Carlos. Unlike most enemy soldiers, he understood how Carlos thought. He knew the sniper game wasn't about speed. Cobra wanted the bounty, but more than that, he wanted the pride of taking down the white feather. Carlos heard about Cobra's movements through intelligence channels. He knew the man was nearby, studying him, waiting for a slip-up. Carlos wasn't the kind to get nervous. Instead, he flipped the script. He became the one tracking Cobra. He spent days observing patterns, watching ridge lines, and checking likely hiding spots. Then early one morning, while scanning with his scope, Carlos caught a tiny flash, a reflection barely visible. It came from a hidden spot in the jungle brush about 700 yards away. It was sunlight bouncing off glass. A scope. Carlos didn't hesitate. He adjusted his aim, held his breath, and squeezed the trigger. His bullet hit dead center. It passed through the enemy sniper's scope and into his eye, killing him instantly. A 1 in a million shot. The bullet had traveled through a narrow metal tube, just wide enough for the round to pass through without deflecting. It was a shot no one thought was even possible. When Marines retrieved Cobra's body, they confirmed that the sniper had been zeroing in on Hathcock when he was hit. If Carlos had hesitated even a second, he might have been the one to die. The story of that shot spread quickly. Even among seasoned snipers, it was almost unbelievable. No one had ever pulled off something like it in live combat. The Cobra was gone, and Carlos's legend only grew stronger. But the Viet Cong didn't give up easily. In the final months of 1966, a new threat began to haunt the areas around Hill 55. A female Viet Cong sniper and interrogator known by the nickname Apache. Her presence wasn't just feared for her shooting skills. What made her terrifying was her cruelty. Apache wasn't an ordinary fighter. She was a commander with a Viet Cong unit that operated in the dense regions near U.S. Marine outposts. She became infamous for capturing young Marines during patrols, tying them to posts or trees, and torturing them slowly, not for information, but as a method of psychological warfare. She would let the screams echo toward American positions, forcing the men in the base to listen. She wanted them to feel helpless, and she succeeded. Marines returning from patrols would talk about what they'd heard, and some had seen her from a distance, always surrounded by guards, always slipping back into the jungle before anyone could fire. When Carlos heard about her, it hit him differently. He had seen plenty of death by then, but this was something darker. She wasn't just killing Marines. She was breaking their spirit. Carlos knew that if someone didn't stop her, more Marines would suffer in ways that went beyond the battlefield. So he set out to find her. He spent days studying the terrain where her unit operated. He moved alone, sleeping in shallow depressions, eating only enough to stay focused. He monitored radio chatter and watched for patterns in enemy movement. He never got too close, but eventually on a quiet afternoon, he saw her. She stepped into a clearing near a small camp, speaking to a group of fighters. Carlos took his time. He confirmed her identity, checked the wind and calculated the distance. And when the moment came, he fired. The bullet struck her cleanly. She dropped before anyone even understood what had happened. Her death wasn't announced on any radio. There were no headlines. But the Marines at Hill 55 felt the change immediately. The screams stopped, the ambushes slowed, and there was finally some relief. For Carlos, though, it wasn't a victory. He never smiled about that shot. He never spoke of it with pride. Apache's face and what she had done stayed with him. Not because he regretted pulling the trigger, but because he knew what war could turn people into. Even women, even legends. By early 1967, Carlos had recorded 93 confirmed kills. Each of those kills required a witness, usually a spotter or another Marine who could identify that the shot had struck and killed the target. That was the official system, but in reality, many of Carlos's missions were solo. He often operated deep behind enemy lines where witnesses weren't possible, just success or failure. That's why his actual kill count was believed to be well over 300. Other Marines who served with him supported that estimate, and intelligence reports from the enemy side hinted at even higher numbers. But Carlos never argued about it, never corrected or inflated the figures. In fact, he didn't like talking about numbers at all. He didn't view his kills as achievements. Every shot was tied to a life, and every life taken left a mark. His job was to protect Marines, but that didn't make it easy. He saw their faces through his scope. He watched the aftermath. He felt the weight of every shot he took. Carlos hated being called a hero, and when people praised his record, he grew quiet because he knew what those numbers meant to the families on the other side of the war. He once said he would have rather saved one Marine than kill 50 enemy soldiers. That was his mindset. For him, the goal was always defense, not destruction. By 1969, Carlos had accomplished more than anyone could have expected. But when a high-risk mission came up, he didn't hesitate and volunteered, knowing full well it might be his last. Carlos and his spotter moved through hostile terrain, navigating thick jungle and narrow trails under constant threat of detection. The target was believed to be a commander responsible for orchestrating coordinated attacks against U.S. forces in the region. Taking him out would disrupt enemy operations for weeks, maybe longer. The mission was a success. They eliminated the target and began their return. But on the way back, the armored vehicle they were riding in, an Amtrak, hit a landmine. The explosion was massive. Carlos was thrown from the vehicle, his body immediately engulfed in flames. The fire spread quickly across his arms, legs, and back, melting his uniform and searing his skin. Despite the pain, Carlos managed to help pull others from the wreckage before collapsing. He suffered third-degree burns over more than 40% of his body. His hands were severely damaged. His face and limbs bore the worst of it. For a time, doctors weren't sure he'd survive. Many believed even if he lived, he'd never walk again, much less hold a rifle. Carlos' career as a combat sniper ended that day. But the next chapter of his life was about to begin. He spent the next several months in military hospitals undergoing skin grafts and painful treatments. He focused on recovery with the same discipline he had used in the jungle. Eventually, he regained the ability to walk. Despite being unable to return to the battlefield, Carlos refused to leave the Marine Corps. In 1975, he played a major role in founding the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School in Quantico, Virginia. His real-life experience made him the perfect instructor. He didn't teach from textbooks. He taught from memory. Young Marines listened closely. When Carlos spoke, he didn't tell war stories for entertainment. He explained what it meant to take a life. He taught not just marksmanship, but ethics, responsibility, and restraint. In the years that followed, Carlos faced a slow and painful enemy that couldn't be seen: multiple sclerosis. The disease began attacking his nervous system in the early 1980s. At first it was small things: weakness in the legs, a tremor in the hand, fatigue that didn't go away. But as time passed, the symptoms worsened. He began using a cane, then a wheelchair. Carlos had already fought in one of the harshest wars on Earth. Now his own body was turning against him. But he didn't complain. He never used his illness as an excuse. He continued to teach as long as he could, adapting to his limitations and pushing through the pain. Throughout it all, his wife Jo was by his side. In 1996, Carlos was awarded the Silver Star, decades after his most dangerous missions in Vietnam. It was one of the highest honors in the U.S. military. For years, others had lobbied for him to receive the recognition he had long deserved. Carlos accepted the award with humility, not for the sake of medals or pride, but as a tribute to those he served with, especially the ones who didn't come home. On February 23, 1999, multiple sclerosis had taken its final toll, and Carlos passed away at just 56 years old. At his funeral, fellow Marines came to pay their respects. He was more than a sniper. He was a protector, a teacher, a quiet warrior who never asked for anything in return.